All right, guys, sorry about that. This is part two. Let's keep on going here. We're talking about, and watch part one if you haven't seen this, if you don't know what I'm talking about right now. But what we're going to be continuing to discuss is how do you request permission to publish previously published book chapters as articles. So like I was saying, you need to go to the permissions department for whichever one of the large book publishers or journal article publishers are that you're dealing with. For example, like a Wiley or a Sage and so forth. And oftentimes what will happen is you'll have a digital form. You'll have to say, here's the journal. Here is the year that it was published, the volume, the issue number, the name of the article. You'll have to identify yourself, and you'll have to say what you're asking permission for. Sometimes there's a drop-down menu. Sometimes you'll just have to kind of type in and explain the situation to say that you want to publish one as the other. Now, here's my ironclad rule. You must, at a very minimum, wait 1 calendar year after the book comes out or after the journal article has actually been published. So not when it's advanced online or online first. No, it has to have actually come out, okay? Wait 1 calendar year until writing to them. To be honest, the longer you can wait, the better, so long as the data doesn't get stale or whatever the content is that you created doesn't get stale, okay? Now, when that is when you've gotten to that point, then it's something where it's appropriate for you to be able to reach out to them and ask why, because it gives them the opportunity to get, for the lack of a better phrase, their pound of flesh. When the article first comes out, usually up to 12 months after it first comes out, is the biggest sprint in terms of people buying it, right? If it's a journal article or buying the book because of it. Obviously, it's something where the publisher is going to need to have some sort of a compelling reason to allow you to do this. Because like I mentioned in the previous part, in part one of this live stream, otherwise they're basically shooting themselves in the foot monetarily. And these folks oftentimes are publicly traded companies. They care about the revenue, okay? So you just need to take that into consideration. So that's how you request permission. The next sub-question here was, does the same journal selection process apply? And the answer is yes. So in Publication Academy, there is an entire module on nothing but best practices in journal selection. And absolutely, this is something where if you've published something as a book chapter, now you're going to be publishing it as a article, or you're going to try to submit it as an article and publish it as an article. Yes, the same journal selection process applies. The only modification that I would make is that before formally submitting it, my recommendation is that in a pre-submission inquiry, what I want you to do is make sure you send a pre-submission inquiry and you explain that it was previously published as a book chapter or parts of it were previously published as a book chapter, okay? You want to make sure that you say that, okay? Why? Because number one, it's the right thing to do. You should be transparent. And number two, in a standard submission, you are going to be asked whether or not any part of an article has been previously published in some way, shape, or form. Also, oftentimes what happens is that the new publisher or the editor-in-chief on behalf of the publisher of a journal is going to ask that you send to them the permission form that you get from that permissions department, okay? So what you should do, honestly, is wait until you get that formal permission before you end up submitting to a different journal, okay? Because you're going to have to submit it anyway. Worst comes to worst, I mean, this would be a terrible situation, is if you submit that piece for publication and it gets accepted, but you don't yet have the copyright permission. Oh my gosh, that's a really bad situation to be in, okay? Because then, I mean, you can't publish it legally. You cannot publish it because you've given the IP, the intellectual property, to somebody else. If you want to learn all about intellectual property, there is literally just the most comprehensive publishing course about journal articles, books, and so forth on Publication Academy that is all about intellectual property. You can take that module, okay? And remember, you can build your own custom curriculum on there as well, publicationacademy.com. Next sub-question here, what category of article would it be submitted under? Well, it depends the type of book chapter that it is, right? If the function of the book chapter is to report on one specific study, then you would submit it as a primary article. It would just be a regular article. If it usually, most book chapters are pieces that serve the function of being literature reviews. So in some cases, I would say most often it would be submitted as a review. It could also be a commentary if you want to take that content and use it to be able to comment on a piece, on a recent article that's been published, or even better yet, is advanced online first, whatever they want to say. It doesn't have a formal volume and issue number, but it is published online, is what I mean. Pick one of those from the most recent volume of what actually has been published, and then I want you to go on there. I want you to take a look at if there's anything on there that's relevant to you, and then you can use your content from the book chapter to be able to publish a commentary. And you can also publish an editorial, and we'll get to that in just a moment. But those are the most common forms of categories of an article. There is no specific category, though, for former book chapters to be published as articles, understandably, right? Next, do any changes with content or formatting need to be made at all? Like I mentioned, I believe yes. For formatting especially, this is something where you need to follow the instructions for authors, i.e. the formatting guidelines of the target journal, obviously. In addition to that, a book chapter oftentimes, in terms of its structure, is a little bit more loose than the type of a review, at least, than you would find in a peer-reviewed journal article. A peer-reviewed journal article usually has a pretty preset skeleton. When it comes to a book chapter, though, it's something where you usually also can make them a lot longer. There's no max word count most of the time. And if there is, it's very generous. Usually there's no max reference count. Again, if there is, it's very generous. So that's essentially what my guidance would be there, is just use previous, let's say, narrative reviews, for example, in the journal as a guide in terms of how the piece should read. And make sure that there's a strong goodness of fit, of course, between the journal that you're selecting, the kind of content they usually publish, and the nature of the content that is in your book chapter. Okay, so that's my guidance on that. Next, do you have any guidance on how to submit an editorial? The answer there is sure. In terms of submitting an editorial, the most important thing, again, is that you take a look at the journal, make sure they accept editorials in the first place, find out in their instructions for authors, what's the max length of the thing, what is the max reference count, because they're usually going to be quite brief. In certain fields, editorials can be really quite long, but even within those fields, there will still be journals that really constrict the editorial length, okay? Now, remember, there's different ways to get around this. One is to be able to write a commentary. If you want to write something even shorter, you can write a letter to the editor. Usually, editors, they've got carte blanche to do what they want with those if you submit them. In other words, it doesn't even go out for peer review. It's just got what we call desk review, which is the editor-in-chief taking a look, giving a yay or nay, putting those things in there. Oftentimes, letters to the editor end up looking a little bit like a classified section in an old newspaper, where it's just like, letter on a whole bunch of pages. Okay. So that's what I would say. So give me one sec. So, okay. If you've got something that is theory-based, yes, you can submit it as an editorial. That is true. If it is comprehensive enough, though, I would say that you can also submit it as a narrative review. It depends how comprehensive the piece is and how many main points you're making. If you are introducing, for example, an entirely new theoretical framework for something, right, which would arguably like a new construct, right, or a new way of operationalizing an existing construct, then it's something where you need to go truly in depth. And there's no doubt that reviews are perceived to be more important, or certainly as more respectable than editorials. Why? Because editorials are seen to have a very specific perspective, right? And because of that, people make the assumption that the person who has submitted the article, they're taking a really hardline perspective on something. It's almost like they want to be part of a debate, versus if you submit something as a secondary article, something like a review, for instance, then it's something where it is much more neutral, okay? And obviously that kind of at least perceived scholarly objectivity is very important. But make sure that the journal, like I said, does accept editorials. If it does, make sure that your piece is better suited as an editorial than as some sort of a review. And after that, go to town. I would say make sure that everything, again, is within the right framework with the instructions for authors, and you're going to be fine. As always, guys, you can always book one-on-one sessions with me, and I'm more than happy to take a look at any manuscripts that you've developed. and we can go through them together. Okay, more than happy to do that. Again, the place to go for that is jphoenixsingh.com. Okay, so guys, that's what I've got. Anybody who's just joining us, this is part 2 of the live stream. Part 1, for some reason, my video froze, so I apologize for that. But give me the update, guys. Does anybody have any questions before I sign off for today? At which time I need to buy my buddy 4 over-the-counter antigen tests. So if you see that, that's what's on my hand. That's what it is. But I'm taking a look at the chat window, guys. So I'll give you guys a couple of minutes if anybody does have questions. And if not, I'll go ahead and sign off for today. All right. Awesome. Okay, cool, guys. So it seems like everybody's good for today. I appreciate your time, and I'm looking forward to seeing y'all in the next one. Bye-bye.